I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture. Hey, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
By the time you're listening to this, it'll be the new year already. And at the time of recording, it is late 2024. We're in the end of December. And we are in the midst of all of the New Year's predictions. What's going to happen in the new year? How to prepare for your new year? What's going to happen to you in the new year? And I've been seeing a lot about Nostradamus as one particular source of predictions. And I've been always very interested in Nostradamus. Have you heard of like the Nostradamus of the stock market, the Nostradamus of the weather? Different kind of personalities deemed the Nostradamus of their sphere.
I have not. I mean, when you brought up this episode topic, I literally thought you were talking about the Hunchback of Notre Dame, like the Disney movie. So I am very unfamiliar here.
Okay, well, we all know I like my oracle divination kind of stuff. This is kind of like a side tangent, but on a personal note, I've been doing this thing called the 12 magical days of December after the winter solstice.
Oh.
Is this also new information?
Yes.
Should I explain to you what's
Brand
going
new.
on?
Please do. Educate me.
Okay, so December 21st is the winter solstice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't actually know what the roots are, but like now I think it's kind of like a pagan, witchy kind of thing to do. You write down 13 wishes for the new year on a piece of paper, cut them up, fold them, and then put them in a bag. And on each day, starting on the 21st of December, you pull out a random, like you're not allowed to look at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you pull out a random wish and you burn it in a candle that night.
Oh.
And you like release your wish to the universe, God, whatever you believe in. On January 1st, this is going to be the 12th day, you pull your last one, burn it, and then you have one left. It's the 13th. And this is the only one that you read. And that wish is the one that you're responsible for. It's one that like you have to focus on. The rest of them are taken care of, but like that's one that you have to focus on, like manifesting and bringing in with work.
Interesting.
So, yeah. And then also every night during these 12 magic nights, you pull a tarot card. And it's supposed to represent that month of 2025, like the new year. So yesterday I pulled February's card, read it, and decided how that lesson was going to be brought in February. So I've been doing a little bit of divination for myself for 2025.
Wait, that's wild. So you literally are lighting a candle every night and burning a little piece of paper in your room?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
They're all in this bag.
That's amazing. Cute. True witch. True witch.
I'm trying.
I think it's very cool that you're only responsible for one. And the rest you just trust and give to the universe.
Yeah, I couldn't be responsible for all 13. No way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been very into the tarot cards lately, into divination, always have been, but I'm trying to be more intentional about learning about it. So when I kept on coming across Nostradamus and more of the astrology side of divination, which is something I don't know a ton about, even though we've done an episode on it, I don't know how to read astrology very well. And so I always find it very fascinating when these figures come up in history and kind of stand the test of time as having done very intense, accurate predictions. And Nostradamus is from the 16th century. He was born in like 1508, and his predictions have stood the test of time. So I wanted to do an episode where we kind of look into figures that have done divination, if they've come true or not, and what they're saying about our year coming up. And then I guess we can look back this time next year and see if any of this was true.
Sounds great. Sounds good. So you took Nostradamus. I took a person I had also never heard of before, but when I Googled people like Nostradamus, she came up immediately and was like the biggest hit. So I took Baba Vanga, who you said you had not heard of, right?
I didn't. But after you told me that you were taking her, I was getting some article hits when I was researching about Baba Vanga. So I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
well, I'm going to find out who she is next. I don't have to click.
Right. So she's supposedly the Nostradamus of the Balkans. So clearly Nostradamus is the more famous one because even she's referred to as the Nostradamus of blank. And she's a woman. She's a grandma. So I thought it would be an interesting contrast. She was born later in the 1900s.
Okay, well, whenever you say Baba Vanga, I'm like, Baba Ganoush. But
okay, hopefully I won't trip up and accidentally call her Baba Ganoush.
Apologies in advance if I planted that little brain worm for you. Well, before we start off, I've just went through my personal history with divination. I want to hear, Lucy, like how you feel just generally about this topic, even like tarot cards and stuff. I don't actually know what your personal feelings are about it.
I would not say I had a strong prior interest. I did notice when I first moved to New York City, like 3-ish, 4-ish years ago, that all of a sudden, all these girls I would meet when I was out at bars or friends of friends would always ask me about what my sign is. And I would say Scorpio, and it would kind of end there since I know nothing about it. So even when they told me their sign, I'd be like, cool. Like, I think that means we're going to be friends, right? Like, that's always the safe thing to say. So it was a thing that I feel like I was especially popular in New York City. And then right before I left my last job, before we started Pagebound, it was like springtime. I was in Las Vegas for a fintech conference. It was a fintech company I was working for. And they had a tarot card reader at the conference. So during like a very dead period, I just escaped and went to see the tarot card reader. There was no line because I don't know, I guess these fintech bros aren't trying to get their tarot read. But I was kind of at a crossroads. I knew I was going to leave my job, but didn't really know when. I wasn't feeling very fulfilled from a work perspective. And she read my cards, and I remember thinking that it was extremely accurate for how I was feeling. Her reading was very hopeful. It was like, because I was a Scorpio, all of the trials and tribulations I had been through that past year were like coming to a close, and like I was about to come around the bend. As soon as I left the reading, I like wrote down everything that she said, which at this point it's like been a while, so I don't remember super clearly, but I do remember texting Avery after and telling him about it because, yeah, I thought it was actually like very, very cool and interesting. But yeah, outside of that, I haven't really been exposed to tarot that much. The most I've done since then is just because now we're friends and I know you're really into it and you introduced me to Co-Star. So
Yes.
I've been checking that periodically. And then, yeah, we occasionally do a podcast episode about your esoteric interests. So
Yes,
that's really the
very
extent
much.
of it.
Fair. I mean, the tarot cards and all of this stuff, it's so dependent on how much you believe because it is so vague. I will say that, especially reading the predictions for 2025 and the past predictions, you can really tailor any reading to fit what you want. So I found that very difficult reading my own tarot cards because I'm like, will our business be successful? And then read the cards and I'm like, well, yeah. Like, tell me what I want to hear. I don't know. Tarot can be a little bit more cut and dry, but with the prophecies that I looked up, they're so vague, man. I just want to like preface what we're going to talk about with saying, I don't actually know if I believe in Nostradamus and his prophecies, which is hysterical given that like I am so eager to believe in literally anything kind of esoteric and weird. And the fact that I am skeptical should throw up the most large red flag that you could imagine for everybody else. But we're going to go through it anyway. I think it's really interesting that it's captured the imagination of so many people. And the articles that I were reading were from like the New York Post. And I know the Post is kind of silly and goofy, but even the fact that the Post had like a full-on in-depth article about Nostradamus's predictions for 2025. The Encyclopedia Britannica had Nostradamus predictions in it. Even, interestingly enough, Lucy, your alma mater, had a huge Nostradamus section. And I was reading his predictions on University of Michigan's library website. Yeah. So it's JSTOR had like 500 hits. So
Wow.
I was reading academic articles about this guy.
Okay, that's like more legit. Yeah, definitely my sources are nowhere near that legit for Baba Vanga. Shockingly, a lot of the articles were like published by the India Times.
Okay, same for Nostradamus. I didn't bring it up because I didn't actually look at those, but...
Yeah, well, I did. They were the only sources available to me.
Wait, that's so funny.
Yeah. I don't know why.
Okay, I was going to say, would it be a spoiler to ask you why?
Well, so I noticed as I was researching that for Baba Vanga, I truly could not find a single legit source. There were some like UK tabloid type publications who had talked about it, and then just so many articles from like various Indian publications. And I'd seen in my research that Baba Vanga, she grew up and was doing a lot of her predictions during the rise of the Communist Party. And even today, like, there's a lot of Russian propaganda that uses her and uses her predictions and kind of, you know, twists it maybe for their own means. But shouldn't I be seeing like Russian articles then? I'm not sure the Indian connection. So yeah, it didn't really answer that question for me. But that was the most I was able to find in terms of why certain publications may be biased or not.
Interesting. So I was seeing a lot of India Times stuff too. And for Nostradamus, I guess he predicted a Hindu goddess would come back, overtake the Western world somehow.
Oh.
So I was like, oh, maybe this is the connection. It's one of his more famous predictions.
Okay.
So
cool. Well, I'm excited to learn more about him.
Nostradamus, he was born Michel de Nostradamus. We can understand why he thought it was Hunchback of Notre Dame. But he was born in Provence, France in 1503, and he dies in 1566. So 16th century astrologer, apothecary, and physician. Obviously, he's most famous for his predictions as a seer. He was a pretty educated man. So he studied at the University of Avignon, but he never finished his studies because the Black Plague happened and the university shut down and he had to flee. So poor Nostradamus was like, what am I going to do with my life? I'm going to learn herbs and try to become a doctor because I can't actually be a doctor because I can't go to school. So he learns how to be an apothecary, and he becomes quite famous for developing this rose pill that supposedly staves off the plague. And after he has kind of like risen to a bit of fame for the rose pill, he tries to get his doctorate at the University of Montpellier. They expel him almost immediately because working as an apothecary was a forbidden profession to become a university student.
Oh, you would hope that most apothecaries went to school, but okay.
No, it's like a forbidden manual labor job that they're not allowed to
Fascinating.
go to school. Yeah. I also want to say that Nostradamus' first wife and his 2 children, after he gets kicked out of school, die of the plague.
Oh.
So he has had a very tragic life thus far, and he's kind of been shunned from polite society, can't go to school, and niches himself in the esoteric occult world and has had all of this trauma and horror happen to him. So I think we're really setting up the stage for who he becomes later on in life.
Do you know how old he is at this point?
He was about 30 years old, which I think is kind of old.
Yeah, well, like that was why I asked. I'm always curious, especially when I like look at historical figures, what their kind of turning point was, you know? Like he obviously became very famous, so he actually achieved a lot. I feel like 30 in 1500, was that like 50 today in terms of life
Yeah,
expectancy?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so. He doesn't actually get wildly famous until he's 50 in the 1550s.
Okay.
After his first wife and 2 kids die, he spends the rest of his time just being an apothecary. He learns astrology. And yeah, he has like 6 more kids, has another wife. They're fine. But he develops this sort of doomsday thing about him. And he's known today as the doomsday prophecy.
Oh.
But we understand why, obviously. He lived during the plague. Who wouldn't be doomsday at that point? Let's be real. But in 1550, he writes his first almanac, which, have you ever flipped through an almanac?
No, I don't think so. Wait, what is an almanac? Is it different than an encyclopedia?
It's kind of like an encyclopedia, but for a specific year.
Okay.
I'm going to actually Google the definition because I've never had to say the definition, but I've flipped through them. I grew up in Kansas for a few years. There was always like the farmer's almanac. And it tells the farmers when like the tides are going to come in and like when there's going to be more rain and like this is the day that's going to be the hottest of the year. It's like the farmer's manual.
Okay.
So the definition of an almanac is an annual calendar containing important dates and statistical information such as astronomical data and the tide tables.
Got it. Okay. Before Google, it's like how everybody knew what time the sun would rise and set.
Yeah. Okay. So he writes his first almanac in 1550 and it's hugely successful, which I don't really know how you can have an almanac be hugely successful or you're just like relaying information. But regardless, he does it for the subsequent few years and he includes astrology information in them. He catches the attention of wealthy patrons who want him to come do their astrological readings. His most famous wealthy patron is Catherine de' Medici.
Okay.
Who is at the time married to King Henry II. And he ends up becoming her counselor and the physician to her son, who is King Charles IX of France. So he's in very high society at this point, thanks to his almanac.
Is he the equivalent of Rasputin, but in France?
Interesting. I think Rasputin was a little more manipulative, right? Like he had his own political agenda.
Totally. But he was in court employed by the king and queen of Russia.
Yeah. Astrologers were quite common in the royal courts. Like the Pope even had an astrologer, which actually, speaking of the Pope, I knew this was during the Inquisition. So I was like, was Nostradamus getting some flack, some pushback from the Catholic Church and the Inquisition for being a seer? That seems like heresy. It wasn't. At the time, divination and astrology was not considered against the Catholic Church unless you were actively practicing magic alongside of it, which I thought was really fascinating because even today it's kind of seen as like a don't pull the tarot cards, don't do the astrology. That's against the church.
Yeah.
So I guess that'll be my pushback. Like not even the Inquisition thought it was. Wow, you're really extreme. So Nostradamus not only wrote his almanacs but included prophecies in his almanacs. He included 6,338 prophecies.
Whoa.
Yeah. He had a lot to say, clearly. His most famous collection of prophecies is called Les Prophéties. And then they are actually also called the Centuries because they are a collection of 942 poetic quatrains predicting the future. And they're grouped into sets of 100, which are centuries. Very, very famous. And that's where all of the prophecies that we're going to read and talk about come from, are the centuries. So a quatrain is a 4-line rhyming verse. And he has 941 rhyming verses and then one singular unrhyming verse, which I feel like that would be a very special prophecy, but I wasn't able to find any information on like what's so special about the not rhyming one. One thing to note, which makes his prophecies a little bit difficult to interpret, is that he was writing them in like this very antiquated form of French and then also some in Latin. Like he Latinized his own name to Nostradamus. And because of the publishing standards at the time, it was really, to this day, it's like impossible to find the original copy print of his prophecies. Everything was broken up into the different centuries. So you have like 6 individual books. Some of them start and end in the middle of a stanza. So like they're not even continuous. And the way that people translate them, because they're so vague, heavily influences the interpretation of the prophecy.
Fascinating. It's like the issue we have with Dickinson, Miss Emily. A lot of her poems were not published while she was alive. She wrote in journals, and so they were discovered after her passing and then published. And like Emily would make these really interesting notations in her journals, like the punctuation was always a big question mark. And depending on if the punctuation moves or not, the poem can be read very differently. Like the meaning can change drastically.
Really?
Yeah, so there's like a lot of scholarly debate. So
wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about Dickinson. Interesting. Yeah, you know a lot about poetry, so this will be interesting for you. A lot of the scholarly stuff that I was seeing on Nostradamus, it always includes like 3 different translations. Because from a scholarly perspective, you really do need to be looking at all of it. The English version that we're going to be looking at, we just know is so far removed from what he actually wrote down. So Nostradamus is credited with predicting huge world events, such as the French Revolution, Napoleon, Hitler, the 9/11 attacks, the JFK assassination, COVID. But yeah, skeptics say his prophecies tended to be about general events that occur frequently in history. So of course, one's going to hit.
Did he predict, like COVID, for example, did he say that was going to happen specifically in 2020, or he just meant in the future there will be a plague or something kind of that level of vagueness?
I am embarrassed to say I cannot figure out how people know what he's saying about a specific year.
Okay. Maybe through the translations. It's not clear.
I don't know. Okay, so I think the centuries apply to the centuries.
Okay.
So that we know. Makes sense. But I don't know how they know what applies to each year. If it's like, okay, this stanza, since it's the first one, this is like the first in that century. I don't know how it works because the advocates for Nostradamus's prophecies say, okay, if it doesn't apply, it hasn't happened yet. So I'm like, but then it can't apply to a year then.
Right.
You can't be wishy-washy
can't
about
be both
this.
ways. Yeah.
Exactly. So frankly, I don't really understand how people know. So I'm looking it up. Of course, Reddit is the first one that comes back. How do people identify the years for Nostradamus's predictions? Seriously, I can't find any evidence that the predictions are for 2024, not just the century. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, everyone's like, because they're so vague, they could apply to any year.
Yeah. Okay, so it's just the media being like, oh, there's something newsworthy here, so we're going to say it applied to last year.
Literally. Yeah, that's what everyone's saying. It's just newspapers trying to make headlines saying that they're for the current year, but they're just randomly guessing. But I went back as far as just last year to compare and contrast since it's just so fresh in our brains. But actually, like, I'll just tell you what he predicted for last year. In 2024, one prediction that he had that actually I believe came true was he predicted great floods and natural disasters. And we did have really intense hurricanes. Like all of Asheville, North Carolina got washed away. Even this year, he's predicting more intense climate crises, which I think is like very forward looking for somebody that was in the 1500s.
Yeah, the climate stuff, I'm always like, okay, were they thinking like Noah's Ark? Or were they thinking climate change, you know?
True. One of the more famous predictions was his prediction of Hitler. And he actually does specifically say that there will be a rise of Hister, Hister. Some of the publications literally say Hitler. And they're like, it was just a misspelling in the publication that was supposed to say Hister, which was a reference to the Danube River in Germany.
Yeah. And it's in Germany. Maybe it's a symbol. So I'm curious, like these seers who really gain notoriety, it makes sense after their death, maybe. But in his lifetime, how would anybody know that he was accurate? Because he was making predictions so far into the future. Like nobody knew if those things would happen or not.
Evidently, his astrology was pretty spot on. So that's what he was getting hired for, was what's going to happen this year, astrology stuff. And he ended up predicting King Henry's death.
During his lifetime.
Yes. He predicted that King Henry would die with 2 gruesome wounds in the head, one through the eye, and he would die a horrible death. I don't think he specifically named King Henry, but he said this would happen to a royal. So King Henry actually dies because he's doing a jousting play match thing during a festival, and the person he's jousting with's joust breaks and the wood splinters and goes one through his eyeball, one through his brain, and he ends up dying of sepsis. And it was like a long, drawn out, horrific death.
Gosh.
And they were like, Nostradamus predicted this.
Yeah.
He was right.
Fascinating. I mean, look, if I was going to argue for Nostradamus supporters, I would say, like, why are you expecting this guy to be that specific? Surely seers, it's not like it's a super clear image like a movie that plays. It's probably like hazy. It's probably like you're looking through clouded glass. And so why should our expectation be that you would literally write down the day and exact year that your prediction is going to happen, you know?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Especially reading tarot cards lately, like you get stuff that's like there's a hidden truth and look deeper and you're like not seeing something. They're not going to be like your trauma is coming up in this very specific way and look here, go to therapy. It's not going to be that specific. So you do have to like read between the lines a little bit. So I do get that. But here, let's read the ones that New York Post at least is saying is for 2025. And then we can see if we can make any sense of this stuff.
Okay.
We will definitely see how vague, just how vague. So here's what we're saying for 2025. Through long war, all the army exhausted, so that they do not find money for the soldiers. Instead of gold and silver, they will come to coin leather, Gaelic brass, and the crescent sign of the moon. Any idea what this could mean?
I assume people say it's about the Russia-Ukraine war, the Russian invasion. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, great job. So they're saying it could potentially harken the end of the war in Ukraine, potentially with French or Turkish influence. Obviously, Turkish being the crescent sign of the moon, the Gaelic brass referencing the French.
Interesting. Hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, here's another. From the cosmos, a fireball will rise, a harbinger of fate, the world pleads. Science and fate in a cosmic dance, the fate of the earth, a second chance.
Oh, I mean, that's a beautiful stanza. I like that. I mean, okay, I don't think this will happen, but it sounds like he's predicting like a meteor will come to Earth.
That's what they're saying. Yeah, wow, you're so good at this. Yeah, they're saying an asteroid coming dangerously close to Earth, potentially. Which I feel like we always hear this like every year.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that'll happen. And then they're saying potentially like the second chance is going to be us overcoming the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we have 2 more. I really am so curious if you're going to get these 2 because you're like really on a roll. Okay. So number 3, garden of the world near the new city in the path of the hollow mountains. It will be seized and plunged into the tub with a capital T, forced to drink waters poisoned by sulfur.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
The biggest clue in this one is garden of the world near the new city.
I mean, that's referring to a place, but I have no idea what place.
They're saying the Amazon.
Ah.
Like Amazon's the garden of the world.
Okay. Next to the new city. Interesting.
I don't know what that means.
What the new city is. Yeah. Okay. Wait, so there's going to be flooding in the Amazon?
Yeah. Right?
Ah, okay. Okay. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so they're saying there could be flooding or volcanic activity because it's the path of the hollow mountains with
hollow mountain.
sulfur. Yeah.
Okay, I get why people like this. I get it. I get it. It's fun. It's fun.
It's like a puzzle.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. All right, last one. This one is my favorite one because it's so weird. And I have a different interpretation than what people think it is, but I'll see what you say first.
Okay.
From the depths, a ruler will rise. In the midst of floods reaching to the skies, empires will fall and new waves will reign. The aquatic empire from the realm of the ocean.
Interesting. I mean, if only it was about Atlantis, that would be fabulous.
That's literally what the New York Post said it's about. They were like, he's like kind of predicting Atlantis here, but
why am I so good at this?
You are so good at this.
That's hilarious. Oh my God. Wait, what's your interpretation?
I think this is kind of referencing the UFOs and like the alien stuff that's been going on.
Interesting.
There's long-standing lore, I guess, from around the world that there's Middle Earth, people living under the oceans, in the oceans. Of course, Atlantis is the lost city, potentially like still down there somewhere. And I'm like, maybe this is not like extraterrestrial aliens even, but like a different life form that we discover in the Earth. Or even the aliens that we finally get more info on.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like you could interpret it a lot of different ways. Like Atlantis, I'm like, okay, that's if you take the imagery quite literally, but you could also argue that he's just talking about the collapse of like an existing superpower, which could easily be the United States of America.
Well, his predictions about the collapse of empire actually happened, well, they're attributing it to last year, but he's quite specific about them. He'll say things like the crescent sign of the moon, like we said for Turkey.
Okay.
But he talks a lot about the red country, and everyone thinks that's China, of course. So
Okay.
China's in for some like naval wars. Of course, there's with Taiwan.
Sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
South China Sea.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Nostradamus came in extremely, extremely skeptical, and I am intrigued for sure.
We have to come back next year and see if any of this happened. All right, I'm very interested in Baba Ganoush.
Oh, gosh. You're probably offending so many people right now.
I'm sorry, Baba Vanga. Baba Vanga.
Baba means grandmother, so
yeah. Oh, I know.
Okay. Okay, so Baba Vanga, she is a Bulgarian mystic and healer who is also very well known for her predictions of the future. She was born in 1911 in the Ottoman Empire. Baba Vanga's childhood definitely gave me very much like Grimm's fairy tale vibes. Pretty interesting origin story. So her father was a pro-Bulgarian activist, and her mother died when she was 3 from childbirth. During World War I, her father was drafted and basically just like left her. So she was dependent on the charity of her neighbor to be fed and raised. After the war, the area they lived in became part of Yugoslavia, so her father was then arrested for being pro-Bulgarian. They confiscated all his property and money, and they fell into poverty for many years. In 1923, a whirlwind lifted her into the air and threw her into a nearby field. She was found after a long search, covered with dirt, stones, and branches, and her eyes were covered with sand and dust, and she was unable to open them because of the pain. They didn't have that much money, so they only had money for a partial operation to heal her injuries. And so it resulted in her gradually becoming blind.
Wow.
So she's
This is like some Dorothy shit.
blind mystic. Yeah, I know. There's all these interesting... There's like the fairy tale, you know, the mother dying from childbirth, being an orphan of sorts, and then Dorothy tornado.
Wow.
She went to school for the blind and learned how to read Braille, was kind of just living her life, living in poverty. Then during World War II, Yugoslavia was invaded by the Axis powers, and the area she was living was annexed by Bulgaria. This was 1941 at this point, and she started making pronouncements in an altered state of consciousness, claiming that she was receiving revelations from a, quote, shining horse rider, later identified as St. George.
I don't even know who St. George is. I've never heard of him.
So St. George is a military saint. He's been a saint since the Crusades. But the military thing is interesting because her pronouncements were about people who would survive or die in World War II in her community. So this is what attracted large crowds, is because people would come to her to figure out if their family members were alive or dead.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure.
It makes so much sense to me that people would come to her because all these super uncertain situations, we're just like looking for any shred of hope, you know?
Yeah, it's desperation.
Yeah, exactly. Reportedly, even the Bulgarian Tsar Boris III visited her. So there were these prestigious people also believing in her prophecies. The Bulgarian communist government at this time tried to repress her activities, but the visitors continued to come, and they kind of changed their approach towards her in the 1960s. So they actually decided to embrace rather than fight the Baba Vanga phenomenon. They made her into a state employee with a regular salary. They gave her a house, a secretary, and a driver. The authorities organized her consultations, and they were the ones who kept the money paid by her clients. So it was like this...
Corruption.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think it's some of that, but it's also like, I think they realized how powerful of a tool and like propaganda machine she could be even then, right? So it was this case of state sponsored clairvoyance. People wanted to believe it, right? So they were just like, well, we could use this. Because, like, communist regimes were very anti religion. And so instead of it being like, oh, well, we're anti her because it's some sort of religion that she's practicing, they actually embraced it. And they even had her be affiliated with there was this institute called the Institute of Suggestology, which was a part of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. They did all this to kind of pass her activities off as science rather than religion and to kind of make her more legitimate. And during this whole period, members of the Bulgarian Communist Party and leading intellectuals would come and consult her, including reportedly the leader of the Soviet Union Communist Party at that time, Leonid Brezhnev. So she definitely had the ear of some very powerful people. She died in 1996 from breast cancer.
Oh,
so
sad.
Fairly recently, actually, surprisingly. Yeah.
She's a modern prophet.
She's a modern prophet, yeah. Gotta say, her story is pretty fascinating. It reminds me of when we talked about the Surprising Cults episode. And we talked about Bikram yoga and like his own mythologizing, myth building of his own story to make it seem like he had these kind of magical origins. So I think one difference from what I learned about Baba Vanga and like what you had said earlier about Nostradamus is there's really nothing preserved of her predictions. So anything claiming, oh, she made this prediction, it's just very hard to prove that in any way because there's just no written records. She was not fully literate, meaning she could only read a limited amount of Braille. So she did not have the ability to write extensively, and her predictions were communicated verbally and then later documented by others after her death. And so, of course, people will say, well, she said that, and then you try to like do some research or figure out when she said that, and it's like, oh, it just came up recently kind of vibes. And so to me, I guess when you were talking about the history of Nostradamus, I was like, okay, well, at least you can like point to a document that he literally wrote with a timestamp on it and be like, that was, centuries ago. With Baba Vanga, like, we don't have that. So a lot of the like publications that are claiming she made certain predictions for this year, it seems to just kind of be the media saying that she believed those things, or they'll just say, oh, she and Nostradamus both believed it, or like she made a similar thing to Nostradamus. And I mean, I was really unable to find any kind of scholarly research or anything because there's just no primary texts even. I did find a couple of Reddit threads where like people were kind of talking about this. And since she, was alive fairly recently, there were people in that thread who were like, I have family members who have seen her while she was alive. And like they were reporting experiences where it was like, it felt like she certainly had some sort of vision, like she was seeing into the future. But those were obviously all like personal anecdotes and we don't really have anything concrete. So yeah, the past predictions, people also say that she predicted 9/11. She said that steel birds would attack America.
Wow. That seems pretty specific.
I think she even referenced like steel birds attacking brothers, which people say are the twin towers. Twins.
Oh, wow.
But unfortunately, like, you don't know if she actually said that. There's no record of that. So it could just be somebody put it out there and then it kind of just spread. I found her very unconvincing. The 2025 predictions were, this is from the India Times. Her main prediction was that Europe would become sparsely inhabited. And then I saw other articles that like took that even further and were like, she's forecasting a catastrophic war in Europe in 2025 with widespread devastation and population loss. But then what does sparsely inhabited mean, right? It doesn't mean war necessarily. Like, I mean, Europe's population is declining. So it's just kind of very unclear.
Did we see any of her predictions for like 2024, 2023?
Yeah, I mean, see, like the publication is the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, in 2024, she made predictions about climate change, economic turmoil, a worldwide economic crisis, which people say like came true, but like I'm skeptical. Unlike Nostradamus, there's not even like her specific language anywhere because it's not written. I feel like the publications are just like, well, everything that happened this year, she said it somehow,
Yeah, that's tough because you could literally just make something.
Yeah, you could totally
There's
make
no
something
way to fact check it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that so many people, I don't know if they actually believe it, but it seems to come up every single year. Like, it's just such a human interest piece that I guess people must care. Like, to me, when I looked into Baba Vanga, I was like, this is clearly bullshit. As soon as you like dig slightly under the cover, it falls apart. And I guess this has always been true of most people making predictions. So I think it's like more interesting when, at least with like astrology, there's something backing it up, some sort of rationale that you can point to.
Yeah, I guess with Nostradamus specifically, what I was seeing in more scholarly articles is that since he was an astrologer, his predictions were astrology based.
Mm-hmm.
And the skeptics would be like, well, he's making these cyclical predictions that, of course, are going to happen in any century. And then the proponents would say, well, history happens in cycles and history repeats itself. And so maybe it is cyclical, but that's how it's going to happen. And so you can kind of make these pattern based predictions based on astrology plus like what you assume is going to happen in a century. So I think that part is kind of interesting if you look at it from that lens.
Yeah. It's fascinating that there's scholarly articles about Nostradamus. Like, what were they trying to figure out? They were like trying to interrogate if his predictions were accurate?
More regarding his influence in the courts. Because, I mean, he was very close with Catherine de' Medici and King Henry II's court. So he's a historical figure.
Yeah.
And like potentially how his astrological readings influenced the court and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Or like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like if he's whispering that stuff as advice and then the stuff happens. Well,
yeah.
These are the people with power.
Yeah. Because of his, not only his influence in the court, but just like on society as a whole, because he was so popular, his influence can be studied outside of the actual accuracy of his prophecies.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so where do you land on Nostradamus?
I think it's fun. I think it's interesting. Obviously, I mean, I wanted to do an episode on it. I think it's fascinating, but I'm not going to put too much stake into it. There was nothing that I saw that was like very compelling for me to be like, oh yeah, he totally predicted this stuff. I don't see that at all. And especially the fact that you can take any prediction and kind of say like, oh, well, this just hasn't happened yet. And he has like 6.3 thousand of them. Like,
yeah.
Like, come on. I'm not very bullish on Nostradamus. Baba Ganoush, I think she probably had more legitimacy, but like legitimacy with the people that she was seeing person to person.
Yeah.
Like I totally believe in like reading energies and like some sort of like prophetic ability that she probably had. But I think people are probably in this day and age taking her likeness because she was so popular and profiting off of it by saying she made predictions that she did not make. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, I feel like she's more like your local mystic, your local tarot card reader or, you know, seer who you can go to for personal advice.
Yes.
Which I feel like there's a lot of examples of that, right? Like even when we were doing the research on like voodoo history, and Marie Laveau was known for that. So yeah,
Where's Marie Laveau's predictions? I would believe those. If she had those, I'd be into that.
Yeah. It's funny that it was a man who thought his 6,300 thoughts were so brilliant that he had to write them down, you know, and become predictions for the future.
Meanwhile, the feminine intuition here is just cast aside.
Yeah. I wonder if we have any modern prophets. Do we have anybody like alive right now who people are saying is a mystic or a seer?
I don't think we have anybody who's like making predictions nowadays.
Yeah. Sounds like a gap in the market, honestly. We need a TikTok mystic.
Oh, we have enough of those. We have plenty of those. But
All right.
All right, everyone. Well,
see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Our sources are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.